The scream of my horn was a physical thing, a blast of sound so violent it should have shattered glass, a primal roar of protest against the injustice about to be done. It was swallowed whole by the thunder of the diesel engines and the vast, indifferent Midwestern sky. For a terrifying, heart-stopping moment, I was no longer on a road. I was a stunt rider in a movie I never auditioned for, piloting a 700-pound machine at 60 miles per hour on loose, shifting dirt. A solid concrete wall, a blur of unforgiving, pockmarked gray, was just inches from my left shoulder, close enough to reach out and touch. A 2-ton luxury SUV, a predator of polished black steel and tinted glass, was still bearing down on me from the right, its mass pushing the very air out of my path. And in that hurricane of noise and adrenaline, one thought burned through the chaos with the cold, clear light of a laser. She saw me. She knew I was there, and she simply did not care. My name is Alex. I'm 52 years old, a bit grayer, a bit wiser, I hope, with a few more lines etched around my eyes from years of squinting into the sun. This happened when I was in my late 30s, and my church was the open road. My cathedral was the endless blue sky, and my hymns were the throaty rumble of a V-twin engine and the rush of the wind past my helmet. For 15 years, motorcycles had been my passion, my therapy, my escape from a world that often felt too small, too confining, too full of careless people and metal boxes. I wasn't a weekend warrior on a polished cruiser who only rode on sunny Sundays to the local coffee shop. I was a serious rider. I had the scars and the stories to prove it. I'd ridden through torrential, blinding downpours in the Smoky Mountains where the road became a river. I'd navigated the 318 hairpin turns on the Dragon's Tail with my knees scraping the asphalt in a zen-like trance. I'd crossed sun-scorched deserts in Arizona where the heat shimmered off the pavement in waves and the horizon seemed to stretch into infinity. I understood the physics of two wheels, the delicate, intricate dance of man and machine. I understood that every ride was a calculated risk, a pact made with physics and fate. Only real bikers would understand. Because of that, I was safe. I was painstaking. My gear was always top of the line, my bike maintained with surgical precision. I respected the inherent dangers of what I did, which is why I had absolutely no respect for the casual, careless indifference of others, the people for whom driving is not an act of intense life-or-death focus, but a secondary activity performed while doing something else. This particular day was a perfect one for a ride. It was the kind of day that poets write about. A bright, clear afternoon on a major U.S. interstate. The kind of day that makes you feel truly, deeply alive. The sun was warm on my back. The air was clean and smelled of freshly cut hay from the fields alongside the highway. The bike was running like a dream, a low, contented rumble beneath me. I was heading south, making good time, but the terrain in this stretch of the country was hilly, a series of long rolling inclines that caused the big 18-wheelers to lose momentum. It was a common dance on these roads, a slow-motion ballet of horsepower versus gravity. I found myself in the left lane, tucked in at a safe, responsible distance behind a large Peterbilt semi-truck. Its chrome tanker trailer gleamed so brightly in the sun, it was almost painful to look at. It was struggling, its engine groaning a deep, guttural complaint as it attempted to pass another, slightly slower, flatbed truck in the right lane. They were rolling along side by side, a massive, moving wall of steel, effectively blocking both lanes of the highway. Their speed had dropped to just under the 60-mile-per-hour limit. It was a common enough situation, a temporary bottleneck that required nothing more than a bit of patience. I settled in, relaxing my grip on the handlebars, enjoying the rumble of the bike, waiting for the trucker on the left to find a burst of speed on the next downhill slope and clear the way. It was then that I saw her in my right side mirror. She appeared as a tiny, angry speck in the distance and grew with an alarming, aggressive speed. A large, brand-new luxury SUV, a gleaming black behemoth that looked more like an armored personnel carrier than a family vehicle. It was the kind of car that screams money, entitlement, and get out of my way. It pulled up aggressively on my tail, so close I could no longer see its headlights, a classic intimidation tactic meant to bully me out of the lane. When that didn't work, it swerved with a jerk into the right lane to get a better look at the roadblock ahead. As she came up beside me, I got a clear, unobstructed view into her driver's side window, and a familiar, cold dread washed over me, the kind every motorcyclist feels when they see it. She was in her 40s, immaculately dressed in what looked like expensive business attire, her hair perfectly coiffed. She had one hand resting casually on the top of the steering wheel and the other holding a cell phone clamped tightly to her ear. She wasn't just talking. She was jabbering, her head nodding emphatically, her expression animated and intense. She was completely, utterly absorbed in her conversation, piloting a 2-ton metal box down a major highway at nearly a mile a minute, as if she were sitting on her living room sofa arguing with a contractor. This was back when it was still technically legal in that state, but legal has never, ever meant safe. Another minute crawled by, each second stretching into an eternity. The trucks remained stubbornly side by side, their drivers locked in their own slow-motion duel for dominance. The woman's agitation was becoming palpable. I could see her gesturing angrily with her steering wheel hand, her conversation on the phone clearly shifting from casual chat to a frustrated, shrill complaint about the delay. She was weaving slightly in her lane, a subtle but terrifying drift that signaled her divided attention. Her frustration was growing like a pressure cooker, and I was the one sitting right next to the valve. She saw the trucks as an inconvenience. She saw me, the guy on the motorcycle, as nothing at all. I was just part of the scenery, a two-dimensional object in her peripheral vision. I was an irrelevance. I kept a close, wary eye on her, my own senses cranked to high alert. My body tensed, my hands tightening on the grips. I've ridden enough miles to know that a distracted, agitated driver is more dangerous than a patch of black ice on a moonless night. And then, it happened. My worst fears, realized in slow motion. I saw the front left tire of her enormous SUV begin to drift over the dotted white line, creeping with a lazy, arrogant confidence into my lane. It wasn't a sudden swerve, which would have at least suggested a mistake, a moment of lapsed attention. It was a slow, deliberate, entitled creep. It was the kind of move someone makes when they don't see or simply don't care about what's in the space they have decided they want to occupy. I hit my horn. This wasn't the stock, polite little meep-meep that comes on most motorcycles, a sound so pathetic it's often mistaken for a bird call. The very first thing I did on any bike I owned was to rip out the factory horn and replace it with a dual-tone Fiam air horn, the same kind used on semi-trucks. It was a deafening, gut-punching blast of sound, a 130 decibel shockwave designed for one purpose and one purpose only: to be noticed, to scream through the noise and the complacency. To scream, "I am here. Do not kill me." There is absolutely no question that she heard it. The sound was so loud it probably vibrated her dental fillings. It was a physical force. Her head snapped in my direction. Our eyes met for a fraction of a second through her tinted window. She saw me. She saw a man on a motorcycle, a human being of flesh and bone, occupying the very piece of asphalt she had decided she wanted. And then, with a look of pure, dismissive annoyance, a look that said, "How dare you interrupt my important phone call with your noise?" she turned her head back to her conversation and continued to merge into my lane. The world seemed to slow down, to warp into a surreal, terrifying tableau. There was nowhere for me to go. The big rig was a wall of spinning steel to my right. A solid concrete divider wall, scarred with the black rubber of 1,000 other close calls, was an unforgiving barrier to my left. Her SUV was now pushing relentlessly into my space, the massive steel bumper just feet from my leg, a predator closing in for the kill. I had no choice. I had one option to save my own life. I laid on my horn, its desperate, continuous blast a soundtrack to my own potential death, and veered left, off the smooth, predictable pavement and onto the dirt and gravel shoulder. The transition was jarring and violent. One moment I was on stable asphalt. The next I was on loose earth, the bike bucking and weaving beneath me like a wild animal. 60 miles per hour on dirt, with the concrete wall a terrifying blur of gray just inches from my handlebars. The sound of gravel and stones spraying against the concrete was like machine gun fire, a deafening staccato against the scream of my horn and the roar of the engines. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs, a wild bird trapped in a cage, but 20 years of experience took over. My body reacted before my mind could succumb to panic. I didn't touch the brakes. That would have meant an instant, catastrophic crash. I stayed loose on the handlebars, letting the bike find its own path through the treacherous terrain, my eyes up, looking for a way out, my entire being focused on one singular goal: survive. I slowed just enough to let her pass, the entire side of her enormous black SUV filling my vision, a rolling eclipse blocking out the sun. For a second, all I could see was her door panel, her window, and the faint silhouette of her head still tilted towards her phone. Then, with a careful, steady application of throttle, I guided the bike back onto the blessed, stable pavement, falling in line directly behind her. My hands were shaking, not from fear anymore, but from a white-hot, incandescent rage. Adrenaline, raw and pure, coursed through my veins like electricity. The sheer, absolute, sociopathic arrogance of her actions was staggering. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't a mistake or a moment of inattention. I knew she saw me. I had looked directly into her eyes. And in that moment, she had made a conscious, deliberate decision that her phone call, her impatience, her desire to save 3 seconds on her journey, was more important than my life. I wasn't a person to her. I was an obstacle, an insect to be brushed aside without a second thought. I followed her for another minute, maybe 2, my mind a maelstrom of fury and disbelief. I waited for some sign of remorse, some acknowledgement of the fact that she had just nearly committed vehicular homicide. A flash of the hazard lights, a tentative, apologetic wave in the rearview mirror. Anything. There was nothing. In fact, through her back window, I could still see the silhouette of her head, tilted to the side, the phone still clamped to her ear. She was completely oblivious, completely unconcerned. She had tried to kill me, and she had already forgotten about it. That's when something inside me snapped. It was a quiet, cold, and definitive break. The calm, rational, defensive rider was gone, burned away by the fury of her indifference. He was replaced by something colder, something harder, something that demanded not safety, but retribution. This could not go unanswered. This level of casual, dehumanizing disregard for another human life demanded a response. It demanded a lesson, a loud one. A bit further down the road, the landscape of the highway changed slightly. The concrete divider wall was still flush against the left lane, but the grassy, gravelly shoulder had disappeared. In its place was a solid paved strip about 3 feet wide, a maintenance channel, maybe, or an old lane marker. It wasn't wide enough for a car, but for a motorcycle, it was a perfect, narrow channel of opportunity. It was a path laid out by fate. My emotions took the controls. My rational mind, a small, frightened voice in the back of my skull, was screaming at me to slow down, to pull over, to just let it go. But my hand, acting on its own accord, rolled on the throttle. The engine of my bike, a powerful V-twin, roared to life, a deep, guttural snarl of anger. I surged forward, closing the distance between us in seconds. I didn't pull up behind her this time. I moved into that narrow, paved strip on her left, a ghost in her blind spot, a predator stalking its prey. The big rig was still on her right, boxing her in. She was trapped, and she didn't even know it. I pulled up right alongside her driver's side door, the roar of my engine echoing and amplifying in the tight space between her SUV and the concrete wall. As I drew level with her side mirror, I leaned over slightly, my eyes locked on the target. I was wearing my riding gloves, heavy-duty leather with reinforced stitching and hard carbon fiber shells over the knuckles, designed to protect my hands from asphalt in a high-speed crash. I didn't slow down. In one smooth, powerful, and exquisitely violent motion, I swung my left arm, putting my entire body weight and all my pin-up fury into the blow. My armored knuckles connected with the base of her side mirror with a sickening crack. The entire assembly, mirror, housing, electronics, disintegrated on impact, exploding off the doorpost in a shower of black plastic and shattered glass. I'm sure the sound inside her car was like a gunshot, a deafening, terrifying bang just inches from her head. To me, it was entirely painless. My glove absorbed the entire impact. It was designed for exactly that kind of force. My last vision of her is burned into my memory forever. Her face was a mask of pure, unrestrained horror. Her mouth was agape in a silent scream. Her phone was gone, likely dropped to the floor in shock. In that moment, the outside world had finally, violently, intruded upon her self-absorbed bubble. The insect had bitten back, and it had drawn blood. I didn't linger to admire my work. As I passed the front of her SUV, I downshifted hard, the engine screaming in protest as I dumped the clutch. I shot up that narrow concrete strip like a missile of fury, blowing past the front of the big truck and back into the open lane. I was free. I knew, with absolute, chilling certainty, that her next move would be to call the police. My bike was distinctive. I was a big guy. She had a perfect description and a righteous fury of her own now. So I did the only thing I could do. I tucked in behind the windscreen, twisted the throttle to the stop, and held it there. For the next 10 minutes, I didn't let up. The speedometer needle climbed past 100, and the world became a blur of green and gray. I weaved through traffic with a precision born of desperation, pushing the bike in my own limits, putting as much distance as possible between myself and the consequences of my actions. Every flicker of headlights in my mirror was a potential patrol car. Every siren I heard in the distance, however faint, made my heart leap into my throat. But I kept going. 10 minutes at that speed put me a good 15, maybe 20 miles away. By the time she could have composed herself, found her phone, gotten through to a dispatcher, and they could have relayed the call to a patrol car, I was long gone. Just another ghost on the interstate, my heart hammering with a toxic cocktail of adrenaline, fear, and savage satisfaction. Looking back on it now, from the safe distance of years and wisdom, I know it was a stupid move. It was a dangerous, reckless act of road rage, born of a moment of pure, unadulterated fury. I could have been arrested. I could have caused another worse accident. It's not something I would do today. But I cannot, with any honesty, say that I regret it. In that moment, as the wind screamed past my helmet and the memory of her horrified face filled my mind, revenge felt good. It felt like justice. It felt like, for one brief, violent, and glorious moment, I had balanced the scales. I had made the world make sense again.